Earlier this week, Fox News settled a lawsuit brought on by Dominion Voting Systems for $787 million. Throughout the lawsuit, Fox refused to fight for whether election fraud actually took place. Instead, they threw up the white flag and went along with the false narrative. So we did some digging and uncovered some footage of congressional members agreeing that the machines are, in fact, rigged.
I continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that ballot recording machines and other voting systems are susceptible to tampering.
Even hackers with limited prior knowledge, tools, and resources are able to breach voting machines in a matter of minutes.
In 2018, electronic voting machines in Georgia and Texas deleted votes for certain candidates or switched votes from one candidate to another.
The biggest seller of voting machines is doing something that violates Cybersecurity 101, directing that you install remote access software, which would make a machine like that, a magnet for fraudsters and hackers.
These voting machines can be hacked quite easily.
You could easily hack into them. It makes it seem like all these states are doing different things, but in fact, 3 companies are controlling them.
I actually held a demonstration for my colleagues here at the Capitol, where we brought in folks who, before our eyes, hacked election machines, those that are being used in many states.
So even the current Vice President of the United States just told you the machines are hackable. So when it comes to election fraud, Rasmussen Reports wanted to know how real Americans feel about it. They asked Americans how likely it is that cheating affected the outcomes of some races in last year's midterm elections. Americans responded very likely at 37%, somewhat likely 23%, not very likely only 15%, not likely at all, a mere 20%, not sure were 5%. When asked how likely it is that state and federal officials are ignoring evidence of widespread election fraud, 37% said very likely, 25% somewhat likely, 12% not very likely, and only 21% with not at all likely. Again, 5% not sure. So let's bring in Mark Mitchell to analyze this latest poll. I find this very interesting because when you add the very likely and the likelies, I mean, the majority of Americans feel like there were cheating, and then they also feel like it's being ignored. Now, I'll say you didn't ask specific to the machines, but this is still very, very important because, I mean, look, agents, the FBI didn't even let their agents investigate tips that were sent back in 2020. One source tells us that one agent was even fired for asking about this. I know for a fact, because I was talking to lots of people at the Trump DOJ, it was never looked into. And yet this is still a very big issue for Americans as Fox News settles this dispute with Dominion.
Well, we actually, in a previous set, did look into the machines. And believe it or not, voters are actually more concerned about everything else that's going on than they are about the machines. They have some healthy concerns there. I think we got 49% are somewhat concerned that the machines don't accurately reflect their vote. But I'll tell you, out of this set of questions, you picked the 2 best because they are record breakers for us. And by that, I mean they set the record for the absolute highest number of people that we said saw saying that fraud was likely. So before this, we've asked multiple times, how likely is it cheating affected the outcome of the 2020 election? We get about mid-50s, 55% saying it's likely. We get mid to low 30s saying it's very likely. And even before this midterm, we were asking how likely is it that cheating is going to affect the upcoming midterm election? And we never even got a number over 50 for that. We got 49%. And so, here looking back at the election, how likely is it that cheating affected the outcome of some races in last year's midterms? 60%, with the 37% very likely, which is a significant increase. And the internal swings are just as incredible. Before, Democrats were kind of in a mid-30s place on this, and now they're up to 49%. So pretty much half of Democrats say that it's likely that cheating affected the outcome of some races. So I think it's fair to say, looking back at 2020, there was this corporate media, coordinated gaslighting op. And I don't think there was a single public elected official except for Donald Trump that came out and said that cheating, happened in 2020. But the problem is that people share information and people have Twitter, and this stuff is getting out there, and these concerns are not going away. So not only do we have concerns mounting about 2020, now we have 2022 piling up, and they're looking at these officials down in Arizona and they're scratching their head. Why these judges keep refusing to look at it, why the officials are just, turning a blind eye. So how likely is it the state and federal officials are ignoring evidence of widespread election fraud? 62%. So now this number is very similar to what we've seen in other question sets where people are really looking at their power structures and seeing malfeasance. So this is almost identical to the number that just recently we saw think federal agents provoked the Capitol riot. And time and time again in polls, this number keeps growing. And again, it's not just Republicans. So 79% of Republicans think it's likely that officials are ignoring evidence of election fraud. 50% of Democrats. Now, 22% say very likely. I mean, that's a really strong signal. 57% of independents. So it's not going to go away. People want this stuff to have its day in court.
Yeah, I, like you, think that Arizona was a tipping point for that, right? Because we've definitely seen this trend upward significantly since everyone got to see what happened in Arizona. And it was so obvious that even Democrats had to say, okay, well, there's something going on here. Also, talking about something else going on, you all at Rasmussen Reports recently put out a poll on the classified documents following that Pentagon leak. When media outlets release classified information, you asked, they are, quote, providing a public service. 34% agreed with that. Hurting national security, 46% agreed with that. And 20%, which is pretty high for a not sure, was not sure. Most media outlets publish classified information because that was your leading question. They believe in the public's right to know these things. 37% agreed with that. They're doing it for political reasons. The majority, 54%, believe that. And 8% not sure. So what can we glean from these numbers based on as it relates to the most recent situation with the Pentagon leaker related to U.S. troops in the Ukraine and how the conflict is really going? How does Americans see this?
We learned a couple of really interesting things. So our strategy on this was I don't think this story really has percolated everywhere quite yet. I think people adjacent to the media obviously know what's going on, but there are a lot of bread and circuses out there, to be honest with you. And so our strategy here was to just start sniffing around the issue. And that's why we picked these kind of principle-based questions to just see fundamentally, classified information, whatever it holds, it's classified. And if it gets released, and here we said media outlets releasing that information. Now, that's not the channel that this specific, person took, but frequently that's been what it is. And we wanted to see within the demographics how people kind of looked at that. And the standout numbers to me were how much Republicans were opposed to this. And in this particular situation, now, Republicans are less against the war in Ukraine and us supporting them than you would think, although they are the demographic that is most against us continuing to support that effort. But in this case, I think probably what's going on, 53% of Republicans said that they're hurting national security, and only 27% said providing a public service. And then the reasoning for the media outlets to do it, political reasons, Republicans 65%. Public's right to know these things, only 26%. I think the Republicans are scarred by the Trump era, where it was like week after week, every single media outlet was just dropping stuff from the Trump campaign. And I think looking back, people like Snowden and Assange just don't really hold up to that constant barrage of people just coming out with information. And what was also kind of crazy is the real reason we asked this set also too was, well, there is some content in there that's pretty important about the Ukraine effort. So we asked kind of a loaded question about we said classified documents were recently leaked that show U.S. officials have doubts about Ukraine's ability to make a successful counteroffensive against Russia. Does this make you more or less likely to support U.S. military assistance to Ukraine? And people just had no idea. 31% said more likely, 32% said less likely, 31% said it made not much difference. and among the party, that there really wasn't much of a difference too. 37% of Republicans said less likely, 37% of Democrats said more likely. So this one, I think, is just going to wind up just whiffing by people. The war in Ukraine's been going on for a little over a year now. There's been so many headlines.
Wow.
I don't know. I think it's a blip. But those election results.
Yeah, I think this was more of a signal, another signal of how much people distrust the media, in all honesty, right? It was more
absolutely.
that than anything else at the end of the day. Well, this is all fascinating. Thank you, Mark Mitchell. I love the polling as always. I think it tells us a lot, and we appreciate your work and coming back to see us today.
Thanks. We'll have a video with a deep dive on all the questions on election integrity, probably live by the time people see this. So they should stop by YouTube and Twitter and check it out.
Yeah. So after you watch the show, go to YouTube and find Mark Mitchell at Rasmussen Reports for more in depth on these issues. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.